At your command, the ancient device became your instrument, spinning to life with deafening resonance and gathering up the swirling essence like thread on a great spindle. There, in the pale pulsing glow of the machine that set you on this path long ago, you summoned all your strength, focusing on your objective and blocking out all else. With a single concussive blast that rocked the chamber and sent you tumbling to the ground, you freed the souls from their stasis. Exhausted, your consciousness slipping away, your last sight was of the machine, dark and dormant. Then your eyes closed, and sleep welcomed you at long last. After coming to and searching for some time, you discovered the route Thaos used to enter Sun and Shadow, and embarked on a long and arduous ascent back to the surface. You emerged in Ter Evron after days of tunneling through the rubble Thaos had left behind, and when you stepped into the daylight, you were faced with a different Deerwood than the one you had left. At your direction, the souls diverted by Thaos were guided back to the vessels originally meant for them. For the first time, parents of Hollowborn children woke to the cries of their infants and looked into their eyes to see them staring back. People fell to their knees where they stood, thanking Hylea or Mogren or even Aethys for their forgiveness of whatever guilt they felt they bore. But for all the relief that had come to some parents, others only found new grief. For many thousands of Hollowborn had died during Wide One's legacy, many by their parents' own hands. For those children, there would be no homecoming. Yet the last Hollow birth was in the past now, and those parents willing to risk trying for a new child were frequently rewarded, often with twins. Many felt they saw Hylea's hand in it, and the year would be remembered as the year of Hylea's splendor. Lord Radric's zeal had brought him back to life once, but it would not do so again. Radric's destruction at your hands spelled the end of his suffocating rule over Gilded Vale and the surrounding area. In his absence, the village prospered, becoming a popular destination for new settlers anxious to leave Defiance Bay after the riots. Without a nearby ruler, it also grew more wild, with many settlers moving on as soon as they'd arrived, turned off by lawlessness that was excessive even by Deerwooden standards. Nevertheless, despite the challenges of living there, Gilded Vale had survived, and would continue to survive for the foreseeable future. Following the assassinations of Duke Avar Wolfgren and Lady Webb, Defiance Bay was thrown into political upheaval. In the ensuing weeks, the streets had become the domain of looters and blackguards. Few dared to step outside their own doors alone or unarmed. But order would soon come from an unexpected source. House Dominel, realizing that stability was good for business, brought the city's criminal elements in line through a systematic campaign of fear and intimidation. Capitalizing on the mutual antipathy of the Dozens and the Knights of the Crucible, House Dominel continued to manipulate both groups from the shadows, ensuring their decline and eventually supplanting their authority in Defiance Bay. Defiance Bay was served well by the Dominel's rise. Their subtle political maneuvers and lack of legal oversight allowed them to broker a number of favorable trade deals, rekindling the city's economy. Although their cautious approach in the legacy's aftermath had perhaps denied them broad notoriety outside of Defiance Bay, House Dominel's wealth and influence both continued to grow unchecked. The destruction of the machine atop Ter Noaneth spelled the end of the reanimated corpses in Heritage Hill. Though at first few were willing to venture into the abandoned district, it was soon cleaned out and rebuilt. The district's horrors still fresh in people's minds, it would be some time before it was fully repopulated. But eventually the lure of cheap prime land would all but erase the memory. The Duke's assassination at the apparent hands of an animancer had caused catastrophic rioting in the streets of Defiance Bay. But those who had escaped the melee in the palace hearings remembered the testimonies of the strange guest who had shown up that day and absolved animancy, implicating the leaden key instead. The rumor spread quickly, and soon the popular belief was that the assassin had been a leaden key spy. When the legacy had lifted, people came to see it not as a sign that the riots had been according to the gods' wishes, as Thaos had hoped, but as a confirmation that animancy had never been the source of the problem in the first place. Deerwoodans instead convinced themselves that the riots had somehow purged Defiance Bay of Leaden Key spies, and that the end of Whitewind's legacy was their well-deserved reward. The rage against animancers was quickly forgotten, and those who had survived were permitted to return to Brackenbury Sanitarium and rebuild it so they might resume their studies. The town of Deerford had seen the last of the cult of Scan. Dark rumors about the town's many curses quickly faded, and travelers soon returned. The destruction of the Eyeless and the permanent loss of Abidon's memory emboldened Andra. She considered the knowledge that Kith might have found, both of the origin of the gods and her part in concealing it, and vowed that such a calamity must never come to pass. She churned up a fury in her seas. Underwater mountains rose and fell, and the seabed was swallowed and spat out again by the great maws that divide the continents of Kith. Only a fraction of this chaos reached land, but it was enough to swell rivers and spread earthquakes throughout the Deerwood and Air Glanfath. Coastal towns suffered so that few noticed the damage that had been done to Engwithan ruins, from Thane Bog to Twin Elms. Thus, they sealed off the White Forge and abandoned their pursuit of Durgan steel. Durgan's battery became a trading post once more, and Stalwart thrived in its shadow. Stalwart's revival brought trappers, traders, and artisans from all over the Deerwood, and from Red Ceres too. Prosperity brought peace to the border region, as Deerwoodans and Red Serans alike left old quarrels behind. The Flames That Whisper clan found a cautious peace with Stalwart, particularly once the villagers heard of the aid the ogres had offered against the Eyeless. The clan moved back into the Russet Wood, and as Stalwart grew in prestige, the villagers formed a tighter alliance with their ogre neighbors. Within a generation, ogre traders visited Stalwart, and village hunters were welcome in the Russet Wood. Harmka's death had brought the Devil of Carrick little satisfaction. In time, her taste for vengeance soured. What replaced it was a hunger to feel something, anything, new. Summer had thinned the snowpack twice over when she felt the joint at her elbow first begin to stiffen. She turned her back on the hopes of animancy and civilization and walked east. She pushed through the mountains, past Red Ceres, and into the broad plains of Ishamiddle. She had forgotten what it was like to simply journey, no goal or destination in mind. Though she felt nothing more than the steady thump of her feet on the road, the endless horizons and grassy meadows were new to her. She measured her time in the gradual rusting of her body and was satisfied. Her movements slowed, but so did the world around her. Waist-high grasses undulated and tacked in the wind, as gradual as the tides. Sparrows and blackjays made steady pilgrimages across the sky, each flap of their wings a solemn salute. She could hardly move when she found something she had never seen before, the ocean. With the last of her strength, she pulled herself beneath the water, content at last to feel the movement of currents and the constant caress of the waves. Maneha never found the salt well, but she found a kind of peace in her duties as a gift-bearer and in the ebb and flow of her journeys. As she traveled and accepted burdens from Andra's supplicants, she saw in their eyes a kind of peace that she had not previously noticed. It was faith, not that Andra had freed them of their pain, guilt, and regret, but that she would, a little more each year. With that realization, Maneha learned to accept that Andra's ways were as gradual as they were inexorable. The fortress of Cadnua emerged as a bastion of security in the midst of an untamed land, becoming the envy of every thane and earl in Deerwood. Legend grew over time of its impregnability, and stories of formidable invaders easily scattered by the keep's defenses became popular around the hearths of Deerwoodinians. Likewise, it also became a beacon to travelers, merchants, and visiting dignitaries alike. Reputed as the finest fortress in all Deerwood, people would journey from near and distant lands alike to experience its fabled hospitality and grandeur. After the death of the Master below, a strange quiet fell over the endless paths of Ad Nua. The attacks on the fortress above ceased, Ad Nua's silent titan the closest remaining thing to a master in its musty, forgotten passages. Pallegina had missed the opportunity to complete her mission from the Duke's Bells. The Deerwood's trade with Air Glanfath remained weak, but the Valian republics were unable to enter Glenfathan markets. For her repeated insubordination and loss of lucrative trade, Pallegina was cast out of the Brotherhood of Five Sons. She traveled north of the Eastern Reach, where she tried to avoid trouble as a caravan guard, but she could not escape the strange looks and unwanted attention her appearance brought. Haravius took his leave of the party and, after his first bath in years, returned to his nomadic lifestyle. With his homesickness expunged, he found renewed joy and tranquility in his wandering survey of the wilderness. For the first time in his life, he ventured beyond sight of the mountains of Air Glanfath. During his travels, he penned numerous journals and sketches detailing his travels through frozen tundra, searing desert, and tropical forests. Wherever he went, Haravius left behind stories of the Autumn Druid, a temperamental, one-eyed wise man of the forest, known to bring food to lost travelers and unusual advice to anyone willing to ask him a question. Adair chose not to return home. Still conflicted as to his role in the Saints' War and unsure of his place in the Deerwood, he took a ship to Adir and reunited with his parents. There, he resumed the quiet lifestyle he had grown accustomed to in his years as a farmhand in Gilded Vale. When the dust settled in sun and shadow, Aloth looked upon the remains of Thaos Ix Arkannon, his former master. He saw where the Grandmaster had gone wrong, and he knew what he would do better. The secret of the gods would be preserved, and with it, the sanity and well-being of all Kith. He donned the remains of Thaos's ceremonial garb and prepared himself for the long and lonely task ahead. With both their aims fulfilled, Kanarua bid the Watcher farewell and sailed back to his beloved Rawatai. There, he reported on his findings to the Lore College. Kana spoke of the Engwithan people, describing both their vile experiments and their inspiring accomplishments. He spoke too of the destruction of the tablet by the Leaden Key and the group's efforts to erase the Engwithan legacy from the world. Both inspiration and cautionary tales, he said, could be found in the world beyond Rawatai's borders. Kana urged his people to continue to pursue knowledge abroad so that the lessons found there might benefit Tekoa. Kana's inability to prove his theory of Engwithan influence diminished his academic standing, but his passion drew much interest from those less concerned with degrees. Kana swiftly became an influential figure in the move toward a more collaborative approach to expansion on the northern continent. In his personal life, he came to enjoy the reputation of an affable eccentric, willing to share grand and impossible secrets, along with a drink and a song. With Thaos defeated and the souls released from sun and shadow, healthy children were born once again in the Deerwood. Pleasant and peaceful memories rose to fill the cracks in the grieving mother's mind. She returned to the birthing bell, unaware that the village nearby had become an empty desolation in her absence. Thus she began her tireless vigil atop the Adra, awaiting mothers and children who never came. Durrance continued to blame Woodica for the atrocities of the Saints' War. Believing Magrin to have been a pawn in the machinations of the Queen that was, and feeling that Thaos's expulsion had been a step towards reconciliation with his goddess, Durrance tried for a time to reopen communication with her. When only silence came, he took it as a condemnation of his continued existence. Ultimately, he built a pyre and threw himself upon it, using his own shattered staff as kindling. Sagani experienced the 4 months of her journey back to Masuk in vivid colors. She strove to memorize every moment of her final trip through the Dyrwood, Glonfoth, the Valian Republics, and beyond, preparing to tell her village of what she had seen on her long journey. All of Masuk shared in her triumph, and she felt her pride and elation magnified by the joy of her village. Never again did she doubt the value of her sacrifices. After decades as a long hunter, Sagani finally became one of Masuk's most respected elders. She guided her community with wise counsel, and a generation after she finally passed, another huntress journeyed into the world to find her soul. For you, the death of Thaos brought an end to your waking visions and a silence to the whispers of the past. In their absence, you were able to sleep. The questions of a distant lifetime ceased to trouble your soul. All that remained was what to make of the answer. But at the moment, there was little to be done, and the matter would have to wait. A long journey loomed ahead.